walk back up there to get a microphone. My name's Emily Mello, and I'm Deputy Director of Education and Public Programs here at PAMM. And I couldn't be more pleased to welcome you tonight to the opening of Adler Guerrier, Formulating a Plot, and tonight's conversation with the artist and associate curator Diana Nawi, who organized this survey of selections from a decade of Adler's work, as well as new work created for this exhibition. I'd first like to take the time to thank our generous exhibition sponsors, Macy's and the Funding Arts Network. We also thank our lenders for sharing Adler's exquisite work with the museum public, including Murray Chancey Gonzalez, Liza and David Greer, Carol and Ira Hall, Tara Sokolow Benlame and Jack Benmele, the Artist Pension Trust, who are represented tonight by Yulia Tikhonova, and PAMM is also very happy to have a piece in the collection donated by Dennis and Deborah Scholl this past year. And of course, we'd like to thank David Castillo and his staff for all they have done to facilitate and support this exhibition. You will learn about Adler's practice through this conversation, but of course, he is a Miami-based artist, and I know many of you in the audience are already come with some familiarity and are proud with us to highlight a creativity that often uniquely and directly engages this city, while his ideas and forms transcend geographies. Seeing Adler at PAMM over the past year and daily over the past month, working with Diana, sorry, am I going on? Yes, yeah, daily. And
that was accurate.
Yeah, I mean, some people were thinking he might have joined staff. Really practically an artist in residence here at PAMM. Hearing him speak with staff across museum departments has truly been wonderful. To hear not only his enthusiasm for so many varied sources, but the way he processes what he finds in the world with an incredible mix of divergent thinking and carefully considered decisions is to get to know a voraciously curious and inspiring mind. Please join me in welcoming Adler Guerrier.
Hi, I also want to extend a very sincere thanks to all of you for joining us. Your presence, your multitudes is a testament to, I think, Adler's importance as an artist and a figure in Miami and someone who's really garnered the respect of his peers and the public. And it's really great to have you here, and I know that you all braved a lot of traffic. So congratulations to you as well for making it. I just wanted to thank the many people. It takes, I always say, a village to make an exhibition, so there are many people alongside our sponsors and our generous lenders. Chief among them, PAMM's outstanding staff, especially the people on prep and in registration who made this exhibition happen, transporting the works, facilitating all of the loans, and getting the work safely onto the walls, which is no small feat. I think when you see the exhibition, you'll understand how complicated an installation it was, and so hats off very much to the crew and to the registration team. I also want to thank all of our outside partners who worked with us to make this happen, particularly Michelle Reeves, who framed all of Adler's work so beautifully, to Paul Thomas, who helped make the architectural intervention you see in the space, and everyone who's working on the catalog. The catalog, which features a really wonderful interview with Adler, as well as a really sensitive and exceptional essay by Huey Copeland, will be out in November 20th. So thank you to Mylin Nguyen, thank you to Cara Pickman, thank you to Cora Lickstein, thank you to Clara Marin, Maria Eugenia Hidalgo, and thank you very much to Emily Vera and Maria Elena Ortiz, who are working tirelessly to make sure that that catalog happens. And I hope you'll all look forward to seeing it in November. And I would like to thank foremost Adler. So I think that's a good place to start. I just wanted to just give you a tiny, we decided not to kind of focus on particular works, but to talk through the exhibition with you, which I hope you've had a chance to see or will see after this. But as Emily mentioned, it's a survey of 15 years worth of work from Adler, and it ranges across media and takes on a lot of the central concepts that have kind of informed his practice and that have run throughout it. So one of the ways that Adler and I constructed the exhibition was not just along chronology, not just saying, you made this, and then this, and then this, and this, but to kind of start to think intellectually about some of those frames that informed the practice. And this kind of framework that we established very much was this idea of character, plot, and setting, which are the basic elements of narrative, be it literary, cinematic, or theatrical. What you need is a person in a place making something happen. And so thinking along your work in those lines, I think the character, which is often yourself, is a great place to start. And Adler's, I think, kind of seminal work, the work that brought him to national attention and that many of us know, is based around the figure of the flaneur. And the flaneur is a widely studied, widely thought about kind of concept or figure. And the kind of simple explanation for that, it's a 19th century kind of white urban male with time on their hands and the city to explore. And it was really the kind of advent of urban living when people moved from rural areas into the city before Paris became fully modern. It was this kind of moment of, I think of it as a kind of dilettante urban explorer. And in Adler's earliest work, some of which you'll see, he pictured himself as the flaneur and really took on this character. So I wondered if you could talk about your interest in and affinity for this idea.
Sure. I guess, yeah, this image is referred to the flaneur series. My first thoughts about the flaneur had to do more about the opportunity to explore downtown Miami. I think the following image will hint that. So that's 1999 in downtown. I'm still at Noah School of the Arts. And there's an opportunity that arises with downtown shutting down at 5 o'clock and shutters are down. And in essence, the city is closed. And in a way, there's an opportunity, right, to read the city as a stage, to read all the facade of places with names of businesses and various activities that's no longer happening, as a group can be read as a kind of a projection of what a city should be. So the example tend to be what Hollywood does when they come up. They make a cardboard city, they throw it in the back, and then people walk in front of it, and you have an instant city. So this idea of the idea where you can project an identity to a city through images, that for me was the beginning of it all. Secondly, I needed a mechanism to actually bring that to a fore, and the flaneur is, in essence, the most native body to cities. The very definition of flaneur requires the urban landscape as a counterpoint. So that's where I began, both from a sense of definition of what the flaneur is trying to do, trying to mirror the place that the flaneur's body is, and simultaneously this projection of city that tends to be either in the background or at least more central to where the flaneur is. So then the work sort of like builds on this idea of sequence of images. The flaneur walks around, so the walking around implies some kind of a sense of time, which reflects sequence.
So can I ask about the choice of medium? The work, the flaneur series, I think we later see more recently evolves into a kind of other modes, but I think very early in this kind of series from 1999 through the early 2000s, it was photographs. And so it was very much tied to a use of serial photography. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, photography seems to have been the native medium, at least for me anyway. I think partly is to reemphasize the idea of film. I mean, that's a minor point in a way in the digital world, but all those images were shot on film, and the sequencing film, 20 frames per second becomes, in essence, a movie, but it still begins with singularly framed photograph, and that for me was the material. On one level, the flaneur is a literary figure, but on the second level, it's actually kind of developed as we've known it through the exploration of film, either through advertising or film, well, movies in this last reference to film. And I think the work needed that medium. And partly, I was just walking around downtown, and I had no evidence of where either I've been, what I've seen, the little nuggets of interest. So photography became the tool to document that and create installations of work with both of structure, place, and the body became the work.
And I think also the function of this idea you mentioned of time, of moving through the city as being a temporal kind of activity. I think the way that you use serial imagery, I think one of the things you'll notice in the gallery when you go in is it's not a single photograph or a large-scale color print, which was, I think, very in vogue at that moment when you were making these photographs, which have a very snapshot. They're very elegant, but they're very small, and there's something quite modest about them. But their invocation of film comes through their seriality. So as Adler moved to take the photographs, we, the viewer, I think, have to read them in that way. It's a very bodily kind of understanding because we're moving our eye along something almost legible, almost like moving across a page. So I think there's something very built in to the mode. There's a kind of very nice conceptual affinity for the material in the medium.
Yeah, there's, I think, scale of photograph. I mean, we all are used to photographic image by now. But this presentation of photograph at particular scales tend to be read differently. So, probably the most common way, this is not the most common way, reading them in a book, in essence, your body sort of dictates that relationship to book, hand, eye. Reading it on, at the time of this work, seeing it on modest-sized televisions also is a scale that of understanding. I think larger scale images, i.e. billboard or film projection, that begins another relationship where the image is larger than the body and it's about sort of like an envelopment. I like the former, where in essence I'm allowing the viewer to have an experience where they can overwhelm the image or work that's been presented, and that in essence allows them to be to participate in that narration. Mm-hmm. So to put two images together implies a tale, but it's not the same tale by everyone. So that's the sequence.
I think one of the interesting things you said to me about those photographs was that it says it's more about what's outside of the frame than what's inside of the frame, because I think the character, this idea, and it's always Adler's body, so I think that carries with it all of these different significations, is actually, it's about very much the city, and it becomes about kind of the suggestion of narrative that has yet to happen. There's something pregnant in the images, I think, that really, the mood is so strong, and I think it's that body of work, having explored that concept, I think for many years, it kind of gave way to kind of a use of new media, to thinking about printmaking in your practice and to thinking about more handmade works. And I think there's a series that caps the wall of photography there that kind of starts to suggest the emergence of a more precise or more constructed idea of narrative.
Yeah, the next body of work, I mean, the one you're referring to is, what's that called? Lost Entry Return. Was part of a show called Lost Entry Return. So this is, it was kind of like the next chapter where, in a way, I needed to reduce the insistence of my body as being a marker, and to begin to introduce other bodies, or at least a reference to bodies. A point of view became more important. So that work, which as the title implies, has to do with in a way, body is already in motion, right? In order to get lost, that you're already moving about. Entry implies passing over a threshold, some relevant marker. Return and means exactly that. But that's a piece where the point of view and repetition and the layering of structure in reference to landscape became a really important thing. Something that was already happening in photographic images, but there was more implied. Whereas the prints and the works on paper, those drawings, they make that idea more manifest.
And I think the body of work that came after that, which is the kind of central installation of the exhibition, is a work that you made in 2008 called BLCK, We Wear the Mask. And I think it pushes that vocabulary shift of mixed media. I mean, there's video, photography, print, as well as sculpture in that installation. And I think it also signals a major shift in some of your interests. And while I think the city and the place of the city is consistent, I think in that place, this idea of what we've referred to as the plot or the revolution starts to really come to the fore. And there's a very large and important thread within Adler's work that takes on the concept of revolution or radical social transformation through violent uprisings, through civil disobedience, through protest. And so that goes as far back to thinking about the Haitian Revolution, to a very particular and I think very thoughtful emphasis on Black radicalism of the 1960s and a particular African American history here, as well as connected, I think, to international movements of the 60s. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that piece and what BLCK meant to you.
Right. Sometime in, I guess, I don't know, early 2007, the news reported of Turley Smith's passing, and reading his obituary, it reported how he was pivotal for the Herald in reporting about riots that happened in Miami in 1968. And so for me, that little bit of news was the thing. I knew already the role of 1968 played in sort of the world and political and cultural development, at least in the West, to be fair. And how cities like Chicago and Harlem and Yugoslavia, Yugoslavia is not a city, but you get the point. Paris, in May 68. All those sort of uprising has been linked before by other scholars, but not Miami. So that little bit of news for me was like an invitation to go research on what was Miami's connection to a worldview, especially as it was present in 1968. So the installation kind of does that vastly. My mechanism really was I invented a group called BLCK. I set them up in an apartment in Liberty City, right there on 62nd Street, where, I guess inside to where the actual riot occurred. And I also envisioned them as a group of artists who are concerned with the world as they've read it in the newspaper and they've seen it in television news. And so they're going to respond to this idea of image of revolution, the image of uprising, image of other cities under fire, images of police brutality, or at least as it was reported. I mean, that last one is tricky. And how will they respond to all of that while living in Miami? So the work then attempts to link what will be their thoughts. So the work is both a depiction of Liberty City, a little bit of Coconut Grove, pretty much where civil rights power, that's not a proper phrase, but the legacy of civil rights in Miami would have been based. So in the neighborhood of Liberty City would be one, West Grove will be another. And so there's a series of photographs of this actual site. Secondly, there's a series of prints that's sampling language inspired from various sources, like moments like the Haitian Revolution, but also the pragmatic ideas of like the Enlightenment in a way. I mean, I think that's, at the end of the day, well, one of the things that comes to the fore in 1968 is that the legacy of revolution, like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, didn't really fulfill its full mandate. Chester Himes wrote this wonderful essay that brings home this point. And in essence, he says, a black revolution is necessary, right? So there's a piece upstairs that says black revolution means justice for all. And that we need a black revolution to fulfill what the early revolution that left behind. So that's within the voice that the work is done, both conscious of a local landscape, its connection with local and international politics, and how that would have mirrored with the uprising of youth movement, labor movement internationally.
This is the work that we're talking about. So you see the kind of scale, and you see these use of many images and modes of making that have, I think, become very signature for Adler. And I wanted to spend a moment talking about these monochromatic black-on-black protest signs, which have a very strong presence here. And in the gallery, you'll see another series of them. And they use, I think, language very powerfully. They appropriate language, in particular from very important radical black intellectuals and civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King. There's language that is kind of both fictionalized from yourself, but also language that finds its kind of its way in from history.
Right.
Yeah.
I can dive. This black on black protest signs. I needed another mechanism to speak of language. So there's an idea of revolution as we've come to see it. Both seems to be seen from the point of view of the mass that demands more rights and justice. But also, I believe there's an equally powerful layer that tends to be literary. You know, it's the essay that makes us all understand why an injustice has been made and how to rectify it. So for me, that is a place I tend to go to. So to read people like, James Baldwin, Chester Himes that I mentioned earlier, or Martin Luther King, sometimes a sampling of their writing it's very inspiring. It was inspiring for a whole generation. It still has power now. So the artworks then just sample those words. So it's about words, the power of words, the structure of protest, which is in essence a public declaration for something.
Can I ask you then about the title of this exhibition, which appears in a black-on-black protest sign, is Formulating a Plot. And Adler chose this title. We had long conversations about what to title this exhibition, and in part, it's because of the kind of multiplicity of meaning that the word plot, it's a piece of land, it's a diagram, all of these kind of meanings, but it comes out of a very particular historical moment. In 1967, that summer, there were riots across much of the US and riots in Newark, New Jersey. And Amiri Baraka, who many of you know his work, he's among the kind of foremost black radical authors of that era, was arrested on kind of trumped up weapons charges. And he stood trial in 1968, and the judge said, in this kind of, I think, unintentional but kind of genius use of language, he said, "You are a participant in formulating the plot to ignite the spark of violence." And what was so kind of interesting about that use of language is Amiri Baraka was a playwright and a poet, and so he his job was to formulate plots. And so it was this complete conflation of this kind of inciting a revolution, inciting a riot, and the kind of creative process. And it very much, I think, speaks to this idea of the power of language, that revolution begins through linguistic kind of terms. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what that phrase meant to you and kind of your choice of that.
Yeah, that's one of those like stories when doing research for that period. And yeah, the part about being a participant in formulating a plot is like it is the most active thing that you can tell a playwright, right? It's like you wrote yesterday. You're accomplishing your mission. So as much as the judge attempt to use it as some sort of condemnation for one set of action, but on the other hand, it reinforced in a way a poet's and a playwright's mission. Or I think it's probably the most lauded compliment you can give someone who writes, that their word caused riots down the street. It's like so I borrowed that, and partly I like this idea of being. I like the idea that artwork can play roles that are a bit more active than just serve formalist aesthetic pleasure. That is fine, and in a way, that is also easy. But for artwork to actually help others understand, their place in the world, their relationship to how culture, power, or social economics can actually affect them. That's a higher level of, I don't know, calling for artwork to accomplish, and in a way, that's what I hope to do. And yeah, so that's that's where the title came from, and it was too good to walk away from.
Ask you about your own personal relationship. You're too young to have lived through the 60s, and
I wasn't alive.
You weren't alive in the 60s, and
it'll be negative. I will be -7 in 1968.
So, and you were born in Port-au-Prince, so your own familial history wasn't in the U.S. and wasn't really associated with that particular moment of U.S. history, but it feels like a pivot point for you in your practice and your thinking. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit through the lens of your kind of personal relationship to that as being here.
I mean, there's when Zora Neale Hurston and like Lansing Hughes, went to Haiti, did work, translate women, stuff like this. I mean, there's an aspect of, well, I guess that's too specific. There's an aspect of how the Harlem Renaissance sort of like mirrored like global concern, and Haiti being one of them, right? And so that was kind of a wonderful moment.
But Haiti not just being one, I think being this crucial kind of the Haitian Revolution was so seminal, I think, in thinking about Black consciousness and self-determination movements throughout the New World, throughout the next 200 years, I think. So it's not a coincidence. It's not one of many. It was so seminal, I think.
Yeah, I think it's partly because at that moment, clearly a sort of like a projected idea was necessary to create work, text, in a sense, and reassert a sense of self and a sense of communal identity in a way. I think that's what's being read, right? When we see the suite of Prince that Jacob Lawrence did, it reads within that not an aspiration for what has already been accomplished and can again be accomplished. So that occurred, but partly for me, it underlined a kind of like geography sometimes is overplayed in a way. So the limitation of like what happens in the Caribbean versus what happened in Africa versus what happens in the U.S. I wanted to undermine that. I wanted to lessen that, especially living in Miami, where in essence there's a lot of people who come from a lot of places. And as an immigrant, the package of history that I came with is being celebrated in artworks. And so I welcome that possibility that my role can continue to be, I can continue to contribute in a way that still is pivotal in that, diasporic soup. That's a terrible thing to say. Sorry, I can't find the proper word, but it's contribute to the pile in a way. Let's go literary, and I think that was it. And I felt pretty early as an artist that my contributions as an artist is no different than the cultural output of that have inspired movements and others. So I think that was the aim. The aim is in a way to play my part, or in a way to contribute a corresponding block that can fit nicely within this edifice that's already been built. My metaphors are losing me this, that I usually have a lot more.
I think one of the things that your own biography touches on, but that comes up a lot in the work, is this idea of setting and this idea of place. And I think if I were to boil down the essence of your practice or the exhibition in the kind of simple elevator pitch, it would be to talk about this idea of place that's come up in all of these works. And I think one of the things you'll see when you go into the exhibition, the first thing is this kind of really wonderful architectural intervention that's a large photo mural that kind of shows a tropical background, and then behind it is this wooden lattice that mimics very much this modernist Miami kind of tropical architecture that I think all of us who are here visiting or living here will recognize. It's this kind of moment where the city enters the gallery. And I think Miami is so central to your practice. Right. As both a very specific place and the kind of very particular things that define this city, of which there are many, but also as a kind of stand-in for the broad strokes of 20th century history. And so I wondered if you can talk a little bit about Miami, but also this kind of the specifics and this kind of broader kind of way that you're looking at it.
Right. I mean, I try to take a lot of inspiration from Miami, like the image up there. I think it's shot at Fairchild. I both like this idea. Okay, so in taking a long view of how humans establish civilization, there are convenient places, where the river comes, is fresh water and fertile land, blah, blah, blah. So we built structure, we built cities and civilization from there. But there's also at times really convenient outposts, like where we are right now, that serves for laying under palm trees, under a nice breeze. In a way, Miami is this place that I think arises out of a sense of leisure, a sense of calm in a way. It's like, we all have a porch or backyard or a particular tree that we know we can go rest under. And for a moment, it doesn't matter what's happening in the world because everything sort of like disappears. I'm sure other cities have that, but I'm sure ours is much better than theirs. Mostly because our tropics is beautiful and our skies are nicer. But I think that's the idea of place that I'm attempting to boil down, right? It's like, it's that actual physicality where you go and rest, or where you connect your story to the larger fabric of this place, or where communally you and I have a moment, and therefore from now on we always refer to this particular tree or rock or bar or restaurant or whatever. So this relationship to bodies and place, it's like we already talked about how the flaneur is this native figure for the discovery of what that is. But beyond the specific of the flaneur, the methodology that the flaneur used is actually available to us all, right? And we probably use it more often than not. And I think that is really the thing for me. That's that poetic, center to it all. That our connection to place, in a way, we have great license to shape it based on the narrative that we tell, we choose to tell. I mean, it doesn't have to be our stories; it could be someone else's stories. But nevertheless, it's in the telling, it's in the narrating, it's in the connection that, a simple, ordinary place. This idea of the everyday can take on utopic levels of grandeur or simplicity simultaneously. So that's the gambit.
I think that's a really maybe nice place to kind of open it up. I mean, I always have a lot more questions I could ask, but I kind of wanted to give our audience an opportunity to ask Adler if you had any questions, if you've seen the exhibition or about the work. I mean, one of the things that strikes me from what you're saying, the specificity of Miami, I think is so evident in the work, and I think one of the things we see in some of the works is this kind of the flaneur as a way of being and as a way of collecting things in the world and being in the world. And so I think there's a lot of work that also evidences the physicality of the city.
Right.
You've stripped posters, you've gently rescued campaign posters from the streets that have liberated them. So I think that we see in that image that just passed, but I think, I guess that's the other way. The city manifests in that very particular physical way.
Yeah, I think the city is as much its set of production, be it language, a sense of culture, and printed media, and its distribution and propagation. I think that actually is part of a city's way of being, and how citizens, which is not a term that we use in reference to people who live in the city anymore, tend to connect to it. And I think that sort of relationship, that flow through works, culture, as opposed to the physicality and the specificity of a region, of a place, I think moving back and forth is also part of the thing. It allows at least me to present Miami as a kind of like case study, as a model for understanding how our relationship, our communal relationship, and our relationship to this physical place, our proverbial palm trees.
So proverbial palm trees seem like a nice moment to open it up for questions, if there are questions about the exhibition or the work, or
The mango has a question. What is that? The mango.
hi Pat.
Hello? Okay. We're going to ask you to speak in the mic so we can record your questions, and there will be somebody on that side and this side with a mic, and we're just going to take a few, and I hope that you have a chance to speak with Adler after the talk. Thank you for coming. So, any questions?
Emily, here, there's Pat right here.
Thank you both so much. Adler,
Hi, George.
you just made reference to the political signs that you've salvaged and repurposed.
Salvaged.
Actually, both of you did. Could you speak about those a little more? Is there a connection between those and the text and references to the Black movement, political texts that are part of the earlier series, the BLCK works?
Yeah, those salvage operation has to do more with rescuing language. The slideshow doesn't really show it, but in the gallery, there's a lot of things that I didn't produce. Like those signs are one of them, and part of their role to me is that they are a product of well, to be even better, to be even fairer, they're a product of democratic campaign, to be even more specific, right? Because it's really about a candidate making an appeal for your vote based on an understanding that their service will represent not just what they promise you, but the community, right? So that's actually a quite wonderful thing politically. But simultaneously, those signs tend to be connected to not just a candidate, but also a region, a very specific district, that type of thing. And I like that. I like that there are products, there are printed media that still reflect regionalism on a micro level, down to neighborhoods. So the signs that I see in my neighborhood where I live is not necessarily the sign that I see downtown where I work or further north where my parents work. So I like them for that multiplicity, for all these factors. They are language. Actually, there's one more thing. I also like the fact that after a election, when those signs sort of still hover about, you know, not on people's houses, because that still represent, you know, a sense of approval, but on those abandoned lots where they're still in the corner, there's weeds above them and stuff like that. That's especially when they're great, because then this same sort of like democratic campaign and appeal as a language that is no longer functioning as such. We still see them if we look in those corners, but they're not really communicating. So I like that relationship of language that is produced, language that is failing, and that is also absent if the candidate was successful or not. I mean, if they're not successful, that is a double layer of the failure. I like the fact that within the machinery of cities, we can both produce language towards success, language towards failure. There's a great aspiration. And so by the time they become artwork, I guess by the time they are shaped into artwork, it's probably fair to say, I think there's still the latent narrative of political machinery, but it's still, I think more of ideas of design, language, and regional specificity. I think about that a lot more.
Hi out there. Hello. I'm curious by the naming of a number of your installation pieces. They all say Untitled, and then there is a name given. And I mean, I'm asking that because I'm struck by the comment made earlier about 1968 and what it means in Miami. But I think 1968 going into 70s also has a tremendous relevance across the Caribbean region, right? Because the Black Power movement is taking place in Trinidad, Jamaica, and in fact, many of the protagonists there eventually make their way to the US through Miami. Yeah. So I'm wondering, is there a relationship between that history, the Untitled, and then the specificity of each one of your pieces?
That's a really tough question. I didn't see that coming. Okay, so there's a cheat in a way by using Untitled parentheses, blah, blah, blah. And the cheat has to do in a way, it allows a specific artwork to be, in essence, untitled, but and it still attempt to speak about a lot of other things, thus the parentheses. So there's a whole history of art that used that mechanism, and I just followed suit as a good student. But in that piece, though, that piece actually has a really long title. It's BLCK, We Wear the Mask. So We Wear the Mask is a Lawrence Dunbar poem. And in that poem, there's two moments where he speaks of the imposition of a mask. I mean, he wrote this poem, I believe, in the, oh my God, I think maybe in the 1910s. Oh, no, 1890s still. Yeah, definitely in 1890s still. So he speaks of the mask as being an imposition. And then the next stanza, he speaks really defiantly about he wants to wear the mask so that he can speak in this particular voice. For me, that was like just brilliance of a poem, brilliance use of words. And even though it's kind of earlier than Du Bois, that talks about consciousness, double consciousness, which can be projected as a kind of a mass itself. So I'm piling mask in one work. A mask allows us to speak publicly within a particular voice, right? So that is the theatrical convention, the sad face or the happy face, as it is saying. So I needed a kind of a structure that is both is very self-aware and very aware of one's place in the universe. Forget where Pérez was living. This is taking a much larger tale. And by the time I'm also jumping in time, making artwork in 2008 about jumping back in time, about 1968, it becomes a perfect tool. It becomes a tool of how does one speak of their place, right? How does one speak, being conscious of, of a public international stage. So that part of that riot happened at the same time the Republican National Convention was happening in Miami Beach. That implies there's an international audience here, right? So whatever action you take speaks much larger than whatever injustice one have encountered in Liberty City or Hialeah. That doesn't matter anymore because ABC News is there. It's gonna be read large on some TV in Ohio. So it's an opportunity to speak much larger. So Untitled doesn't really play so much within that, but it's the mass part that really is, I guess in a way, a mass is a mechanism to lessen the title or to infer fluidity in identity in a way. I don't know if
Can I add also that this function, this formula of Untitled, I think besides being a device to terrify registrars and making lists is also, I think, comes out of also this idea of formulating. And the idea of formulating a plot is about something in process. And I think one of the things that you'll see materially in the exhibition that I think particularly your use of collage and printmaking is the revisitation of material. And I think it's reflected conceptually in this revisitation of history as an open kind of place in which we can return and excavate and continue to kind of imagine other histories. And the same mode is reflected, I think, in the use of handmade, right? These aren't bronzes, these are drawings. And so we can continually revisit them until someone takes them from you.
Yes, that's true. There's such a rule.
But I think it's literally this idea of mark making, of continuing to kind of do that, kind of create that palimpsest, I think has a lot to do with untitling. It suggests an openness, it suggests something in formation instead of the kind of closed structure that a, capitalized title kind of would suggest. So there's something very speculative, I find, in the practice and very exploratory in that kind of openness.
Yeah, I think that's, to underline that last point too, is that Untitled allows, in a way, for bodies of work to be seen in concert, right? I mentioned earlier that the earlier photograph invite a viewer to create a sequence of images, and that part is really rewarding.
Key, I think, to understanding the work.
Yeah, and she said key to understand the work, but it allows for a layering as well within a body of work. Yeah, and I like that a lot. It allows for a multiple read, but sometimes I am bold and I actually title a piece with words and not untitled.
We'll find you one. Was there one more question maybe, or two more questions? Yeah, please.
Hi.
Hello.
So I just had the opportunity to see your work a lot and hear this chat, and I had one question in mind really. I see you play yourself in these photographs, in that narrative. Somebody else has to be watching you, and you get a really cool opportunity to reimagine the revolution through those photographs. So I guess through the eyes of this flaneur, how do you imagine that would happen? A black revolution, revolutions are cool because they bring freshness to, yeah, it's like the flooding. You know, you gotta kill the oppressing regime violently or non-violently. But I wanted to know how it would happen through the eyes of that flaneur. Like, how do you perceive that?
That's actually a very good question. I think it's not something we spoke about here, but there's an aspect. Okay, well, so I made reference to Hollywood before, and there's a kind of like stylistic sort of like play with revolutionary ideas for blah blah blah. And I have to say, I do not like those movies, or i.e. I did not want to make a work that stylistically visited 1960s and wore the garb and spoke the lingo and blah blah blah. I was actually concerned in a blueprint where I can give voice to any group, all right? And so I don't know how such revolution will actually happen. Partly, I don't really care if it actually happens. What I do think is probably stronger is sense of change and sense of participation toward that change. So, in a sense, I'm saying, yes, the revolution will happen anyway, and I'm giving people entry points.
And we've talked a lot about your interest in the moment before.
Yeah.
Right? So this is the kind of cinematic literary device that seems to actually be evidenced in the work, is not a full explanation of the plot. You never know, but when you look at the photographs, you get the sense that something is about to happen. The language is inciting something, but it isn't the thing.
Yeah, I think that is the key. I think to help understand the system within you live in itself is already a politicized position. It's already a revolutionary position if you allow it. And in a way, to help another to be in that position is already well toward said upcoming revolution. Yeah, I think that's the relationship that I like. I like the relationship of artwork that allows for a much larger, wider view of what is possible or what is.
Before you join me in thanking Adler and Diana, I want to ask all of you, because this is a very full house, to be very careful and to take your time moving out of the stairs because we are so full today, and I just want everyone to watch their step to enjoy the reception outside. And now, please join me in thanking Adler and Diana.